The lands between had known many heroes and warriors across the countless cycles of death and rebirth, yet none quite like this one. It began with a tear in the fabric between worlds, a phenomenon even the two fingers could not interpret. The skies above Limgrave darkened as reality itself seemed to fold inward, creating a wound in the firmament. From this celestial gash fell not a demigod or a tarnished, but a man, ordinary in appearance, perhaps, yet carrying himself with a quiet dignity that even the most weathered of knights would recognize. Arthur Morgan awoke among the wind-swept grasses of the mistwood, his body aching as though he'd been thrown from a horse at full gallop. The last thing he remembered was the mountain, the sunrise, and the long, painful descent into darkness as consumption claimed him. Death had been certain, peace finally attained. Yet here he was, drawing breath into lungs that no longer burned with each inhale. The air tasted strange, ancient, and heavy with magic he couldn't name. "What in the hell?" Arthur muttered, pushing himself to his feet. His voice sounded different here, clearer somehow. His hands, once thin and weakened by disease, now bore the familiar calluses of his prime. The tuberculosis that had ravaged him seemed absent, replaced by a strange, humming energy. He wore what he had died in, simple clothes, his weathered gambler's hat, and his gun belt with twin revolvers. His satchel hung at his side, containing the meager possessions of a man who'd learned too late that possessions meant little. A well-worn journal, a few sketches, memories of a life lived hard and ended with what little grace he could muster. In the distance, ruins of what must have been grand structures pierced the skyline. Strange creatures moved between them, things Arthur couldn't begin to identify. And above it all, a great golden tree dominated the horizon, its light casting long shadows across the land. "This ain't the kind of heaven I expected," Arthur said, adjusting his hat. "And sure as hell don't seem like the other place either." A sound caught his attention, hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Arthur turned to see a warrior in golden armor astride a magnificent steed, lance lowered and bearing down upon him with deadly intent. Without thinking, Arthur's hand dropped to his revolver, the motion as natural as breathing. "I don't know who you are, friend," Arthur called out, his voice carrying across the field, "but I suggest you reconsider your approach." The Golden Knight offered no response, but the continued thunder of hooves and the gleaming point of a lance aimed at Arthur's heart. Time seemed to slow as Arthur drew his Schofield revolver, a motion practiced 10,000 times across a life of violence. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the lands between, a sound unknown in this realm of swords and sorcery. The knight tumbled from his mount, his golden armor punctured by a weapon he could not comprehend. As he struggled to his feet, Arthur approached cautiously, gun still raised. "Now, I don't know what manner of place this is," Arthur said, voice low and dangerous. But where I'm from, we introduce ourselves before trying to run a man through." The knight removed his helmet, revealing a face twisted with confusion and pain. "Impossible," he gasped. "No tarnished wields such magic." "Ain't magic," Arthur replied, holstering his weapon. "Just good old American engineering. Now, mind telling me where exactly I've ended up?" Before the knight could answer, a haunting howl echoed through the trees. The wounded warrior's eyes widened with fear. "The wolves of the mistwood," he whispered. "Run, stranger, run or die." Arthur Morgan had spent a lifetime running from the law, from his past, from himself. But as massive shadows began to move between the trees, wolves larger than any he'd ever encountered, he knew that in this strange new world, running might be the only sensible option. Yet something in him had changed. Death had claimed him once already. What more could this place do to him that hadn't already been done? "Sorry, friend," Arthur said, checking his ammunition. "Running ain't really my style anymore." As the massive wolves emerged from the trees, eyes glowing with unnatural light, Arthur Morgan stood his ground. The first true test in this realm of demigods and monsters would not find him wanting. The closest wolf lunged, jaws wide enough to take a man's head clean off. Arthur's revolver barked once more, the bullet finding its mark between the creature's eyes. It collapsed mid-leap, dissolving into golden particles that scattered on the wind. "What in God's name?" Arthur breathed, watching the creature disappear. "They are not truly alive," the knight explained, struggling to his feet. "Not as you understand it. Death here is complicated." 3 more wolves emerged, circling warily now. Arthur counted his remaining bullets. Not enough. Not nearly enough for whatever this place had in store for him. "I am Darian of Lanedell," the knight said, raising his shield with effort. "And though you have wounded me with your strange magic, I would rather not die to these beasts." "Arthur Morgan," Arthur replied, backing up until he stood shoulder to shoulder with the knight. "And I ain't too keen on dying again so soon either." As the wolves closed in, Arthur felt something stir within him, a strange, golden light that seemed to flow through his veins. His hand began to glow, and for a moment he saw ethereal lines connecting all things himself, the night, the wolves, the very earth beneath them. "Grace," Darian whispered in awe. "The guidance of grace flows through you. You are tarnished." Arthur didn't understand, but he felt strength unlike anything he'd known before. As the wolves attacked, time seemed to bend to his will. He dodged with impossible speed, his revolver finding each target with unerring accuracy. When the last wolf fell, dissolving into that strange golden light, Arthur stood breathing heavily, staring at his still glowing hand. "What's happening to me?" he demanded of Darian. The knight knelt, not in pain, but in reverence. "The Elden Ring is broken," he said. "The demigods war amongst themselves, and now a tarnished unlike any other has been called to the lands between." He looked up at Arthur, with newfound respect. Perhaps you are the one the prophecies speak of. Arthur Morgan had never put much stock in prophecies, but as he stood beneath the shadow of the Erdtree, a world of magic and monsters spreading before him, he knew one thing for certain: the rules of this place were not the rules he knew, and survival would mean learning quickly. "I ain't nobody's chosen one," Arthur said firmly. "I'm just a man trying to figure out where he is and how to get back to where he belongs." "Back?" Darian laughed bitterly. "The lands between call to the lost and the damned, Arthur Morgan. They do not easily release what they claim." Arthur gazed toward the distant golden tree, its light somehow both comforting and menacing. "Then I reckon I've got work to do," he said, reloading his revolver with practiced hands. "And I've never been afraid of work." The mountaintops of the giants sprawled before Arthur Morgan like a vast, frigid wasteland, a stark contrast to the temperate plains of Limgrave, where his strange journey had begun. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he trudged forward, the biting wind cutting through his duster despite the enchantments Roderica had woven into the fabric. "Still can't believe I let that little fella talk me into this," Arthur muttered, adjusting the great bow strapped across his back, a parting gift from Dee, who'd fallen to Moog's crimson blade 3 weeks prior. From atop a nearby ridge, Arthur surveyed the frozen expanse. 2 months had passed since his arrival in the lands between, yet the strangeness of it all hadn't diminished. If anything, the deeper he ventured into this broken realm, the more he recognized its parallels to the world he'd left behind. Both lands scarred by the ambitions of the powerful, both populated by common folk caught in struggles beyond their understanding. The fire giant's forge smoldered in the distance, its red glow a beacon against the white desolation. According to Melina, it held the key to reaching the Erdtree and perhaps finding Arthur's way home. If home still existed for him. "Don't reckon Dutch would recognize me now," Arthur said to his mount, a spectral steed named Torrent that Melina had bestowed upon him. The ghostly horse whinnied softly in response, vapor curling from its ethereal nostrils. Arthur patted its neck, still marveling at how solid the creature felt beneath his touch, despite its translucent appearance. Arthur had changed since arriving in the lands between. His consumption was gone, his lungs clear, his strength restored, but new scars marked his body, souvenirs from battles with beings whose very existence defied reason. A deep gash across his forearm from a Clenrot knight in Caelid, a constellation of puncture wounds from the Crystalians in Raya Lucaria, and most recently the burn marks across his chest from his narrow escape from the walking mausoleum. But the physical changes paled in comparison to the transformation of his spirit. In this land, where death was an inconsistent visitor, Arthur had been forced to reconsider everything he once believed about life, loyalty, and redemption. "I've died more times in this place than I can count," he reflected, remembering each painful resurrection at the sights of grace. Yet here I am, still standing. Don't know if that makes me blessed or cursed. The journey to the mountaintops had been arduous. After gaining the trust of Melina and learning about the shattered Elden Ring, Arthur had reluctantly accepted his role as a tarnished one who might restore order to a world on the brink of chaos. He'd fought through Stormvale Castle, confronted the demigod Godric, navigated the treacherous academy of Raya Lucaria, and survived the horrors of Kaelid's scarlet rot. Along the way, he'd gathered an unlikely band of allies. Blade the Half-Wolf, whose loyalty to Ranni reminded Arthur of his own devotion to the Van der Linde gang. Alexander the Iron Fist, a living jar warrior whose optimism provided rare moments of levity, and Millicent, whose quiet determination in the face of rot-induced suffering had earned Arthur's deepest respect. But not all encounters had ended in friendship. The memory of his confrontation with Dialos still haunted him. The nobleman had been harvesting the weak at Volcano Manor, justifying his actions as necessary sacrifice. This world ain't so different from mine after all, Arthur had told him, revolver raised. Always some fancy talker, claiming they gotta break a few eggs to make their omelette. You understand nothing, outsider, Dialos had sneered. The greater will demands. Arthur's bullet had silenced him mid-sentence. I've heard enough grand plans to last 2 lifetimes. Now, as Arthur approached the fire giant's domain, the weight of Melina's request pressed heavily upon him. To burn the Erdtree, to commit what amounted to sacrilege in this land, felt unsettlingly familiar. How many times had Dutch asked him to do terrible things for some greater purpose that never materialized? Fella can't even die proper without getting caught up in someone else's revolution, Arthur grumbled, dismounting Torrent as they reached a narrow bridge spanning a chasm of impossible depth. A figure awaited him at the bridge's center, Melina, her single visible eye reflecting the distant fires. "You've come," she said simply. "I feared you might reconsider." Arthur removed his hat, a gesture of respect that had survived his transition between worlds. "Almost did. This plan of yours, burning down the big tree, sounds an awful lot like burning down the world. And yet you're here." "Guess I am." Arthur replaced his hat. "Though I ain't entirely sure why. In my world, I died trying to give folks a chance at something better. Thought I was done with all that." Melina's expression softened. "Perhaps that's exactly why you were called here, Arthur Morgan. The lands between need someone who understands the cost of sacrifice." "That what I am now, a sacrifice." "We are all sacrifices in this cycle," Melina replied. "The question is whether our offering will mean anything." Before Arthur could respond, the ground trembled. Beyond the bridge, the enormous form of the fire giant rose from its slumber, a cyclopic monstrosity dragging chains that could anchor a battleship. "I can't promise you a way home," Melina said quietly, "but I can promise that what we do here will matter." Arthur unholstered his revolver, a weapon that had proven surprisingly effective against the denizens of this realm, especially when loaded with the glintstone bullets crafted by Selen. Lady, that's about all anyone can ask for. The confrontation with the fire giant pushed Arthur to his limits. 3 times he fell, his body broken by the creature's massive shield or consumed by the primal flames it commanded. Each time he returned, drawn back to battle by the sight of grace hidden among the stones. When victory finally came, it was not through strength alone, but through an understanding born of Arthur's time as a hunter. The giant, for all its power, moved with patterns as predictable as any animal. In its dying moments, the creature fixed its single eye on Arthur with what seemed like mournful recognition, one last survivor of a dying race looking upon its executioner. "I'm sorry, big fella," Arthur said as the giant collapsed. "Seems we're both just pawns in somebody else's game." With the fire giant defeated, Arthur and Melina stood before the massive forge. The heat was oppressive, reminding Arthur of summer days in Lemoyne when the air itself seemed to simmer. "Once we commit the cardinal sin, there's no turning back," Melina warned. "The path to the Erdtree will open, but many who once called you ally may become enemy." Arthur thought of the Round Table hold, of Hugh, the blacksmith who'd upgraded his weapons without question, of Fia, whose embraces had granted him blessings before difficult battles, of Gideon Ofnir, whose knowledge had guided him through unfamiliar territories. "Wouldn't be the first time I've disappointed folks who counted on me," Arthur said. His thoughts drifted to John Marston, to Abigail and young Jack. Had his sacrifice given them the life he'd hoped for, or had his death been as meaningless as so many others he'd witnessed? "You speak often of your past," Melina observed, "of debts and redemption. What is it you truly seek here, Arthur Morgan? Is it merely passage home or something more?" Arthur stared into the forge's depths. "Been asking myself that same question. When I died in my world, I thought I'd finally balanced my ledger, done enough good to maybe offset some of the bad, but being here, getting this second chance, makes me wonder if there ain't more work to be done." "Then let us do this work together." Melina stepped toward the forge. "I will kindle the flame. You must carry it forward to its conclusion, whatever that may be." What followed was a ritual that seemed both ancient and terrible. Melina sacrificed herself to the forge's flame, her body consumed in an instant of blinding light. Arthur cried out, reaching for her, but encountered only searing heat that drove him back. When his vision cleared, Melina was gone, and the distant Erdtree had begun to burn with eldritch fire. The sight filled Arthur with a profound dread. He had participated in many questionable deeds during his time with Dutch, but nothing that felt so irreversibly catastrophic as this. The burning of the Erdtree sent shockwaves across the lands between a blasphemy that would reshape the very foundations of this world. "What have we done?" he whispered, watching as the sacred tree's burning branches reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. A familiar voice answered from behind him. "What was necessary?" Arthur turned to find Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, accompanied by several knights from the Round Table hold. Melina spoke of resistance. Arthur said, hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. Didn't expect it to show up quite so quick. Gideon's helm concealed his expression, but his voice carried unmistakable tension. I've come not to stop you, but to understand. You, an outsider with no stake in our eternal struggle, why would you commit such an act? Because this cycle of yours is broken, Arthur replied, the words feeling strangely natural despite their profound implication. Been watching how things work here. Folks dying and coming back, demigods squabbling over pieces of some cosmic ring, common people suffering while immortals play their games. Reminds me too much of where I come from. You presume to judge a system you barely comprehend, Gideon countered. The greater will, the Erdtree, the two fingers. Arthur interrupted. Just different names for the same thing, power that don't care about those beneath it. Had enough of that in my lifetime. One of Gideon's knights stepped forward, sword drawn. This is blasphemy. Stand down, Gideon commanded. To Arthur, he said, the path you've chosen leads to Leyndell, to the foot of the burning Erdtree. But know this, should you persist, you will face opposition beyond anything you've encountered. The two fingers have declared you enemy to the greater will itself. Arthur nodded solemnly. Wouldn't be the first time I've had powerful enemies. As Gideon and his knights departed, Arthur was left alone with the consequences of his decision. The Erdtrees, distant, burning, cast an apocalyptic glow across the land, visible even from the mountaintops. In setting this fire, he had irrevocably altered a world that was not his own, an act that in another context might seem unforgivably presumptuous. Yet, as Arthur mounted Torrent and began the journey toward Leyndell, a strange peace settled within him. In his first life, he had died trying to save individuals, John, Abigail, the other members of his makeshift family. Now he found himself fighting for something larger, the chance to break a cycle of suffering that had persisted for generations. Never thought I'd be the revolutionary type, he told Torrent as they descended from the mountaintops. Dutch would have loved the irony. The capital outskirts presented a landscape transformed by chaos. The once golden city of Leyndell now stood shrouded in ash, its magnificent architecture backlit by the burning Erdtree. Knights of the capital, previously passive toward Arthur, now attacked on sight, declaring him traitor and heretic. As he fought his way through their ranks, Arthur encountered Blade once more. The half-wolf warrior stood amid the bodies of fallen knights, his massive sword slick with blood. "You've done it then," Blade growled, his voice a mixture of awe and concern. Set the Erdtree ablaze. Arthur dismounted, approaching his ally cautiously. "Wasn't just me, Melina. She sacrificed herself." Blade's ears flattened against his head. "And Rani? What does this mean for her?" The question gave Arthur pause. During his journeys, he had assisted the Moon Princess Rani, helping her recover the Fingerslayer blade and defeat her two fingers. Her goal to usher in an age of stars, free from the Greater Will's influence, had aligned with Arthur's growing skepticism toward the established order. I reckon it helps her cause, Arthur said after a moment, weakening the Erdtree, challenging the Greater Will. That's what she wanted, ain't it? Yes, Blade admitted. But at what cost? Look around you, Tarnished. The world itself trembles. Indeed, the very air seemed charged with tension. Strange lights flickered between the clouds, and the ground occasionally shuddered as though the land itself were in pain. Sometimes you gotta tear down what's broken before you can build something better, Arthur said, echoing sentiments he'd once heard from Dutch words that now carried new meaning in this context. I learned that the hard way. Blade studied him with amber eyes that reflected the burning tree. You speak from experience. More than I care to remember. Arthur gazed toward Lendel's walls. I followed a man once who talked about freedom, about building a world where folks could live without being crushed under some rich man's boot. Fine words. Problem was, he didn't really believe them himself in the end. Just wanted power of his own. And you fear the same of Rani, of Melina? Arthur shook his head. No, but I fear what happens when good intentions meet the reality of power. Seen too many ideals corrupted by it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a solitary figure, Alexander the Iron Fist. His pottery body cracked in several places, but his spirit undimmed. My friends! The living jar boomed cheerfully. What a spectacular catastrophe we've initiated. The entire realm is abuzz with word of the burning Erdtree. Despite everything, Arthur found himself smiling at the warrior jar's enthusiasm. Good to see you in one piece, Alexander, more or less. Oh, these cracks? Mere battle scars, I assure you. I've been testing my mettle against the capital's defenders. Alexander rotated his massive body to display his injuries with pride. They fight with renewed vigor now, desperate to defend what remains of the old order. And the others? Arthur asked. Millicent. Rogier. Alexander's mood visibly dampened. Millicent continues her journey, though the burning of the Erdtree has accelerated the spread of the scarlet rot in outer regions. As for Rogier, the Jar warrior paused. He has passed, I'm afraid. His research into the Night of the Black Knives finally consumed him. The news struck Arthur harder than expected. Rogier had been one of the first allies he'd made, a scholar warrior whose intellectual curiosity reminded Arthur of Hosea Matthews. Another good man lost to forces beyond control. Damn, Arthur muttered. He was a fine fella. He spoke of you at the end, Alexander said. Said you reminded him that knowledge without compassion was empty. High praise from such a learned man. The three companions, man, wolf, and jar, stood in contemplative silence, watching as ash from the burning Erdtree drifted down like black snow. The moment was broken when a messenger crow descended from above, dropping a sealed letter at Arthur's feet before retreating to the skies. The letter bore Runny's insignia, a full moon crossed by a curved blade. Its message was brief but urgent. The time approaches. Nokron awaits. Bring the Fingerslayer blade. Nokron, Blade growled. The Eternal City, hidden beneath the mistwoods. Arthur recalled his brief venture into the underground realm, a haunting place of perpetual night illuminated by false stars. What's Rani want down there? The completion of her destiny, Blade replied, and perhaps the true purpose of your arrival in the lands between. Alexander shifted uncomfortably. I fear I cannot join you in those depths. My form is ill-suited to stealth. Arthur clapped a hand on the Jar warrior's curved shoulder. Then you keep causing trouble up here. Draw attention away from what we're doing. A diversionary tactic, Alexander exclaimed with delight. Oh, I shall be the most magnificent distraction the capital has ever witnessed. With plans made, the companions prepared to part ways once more. Before leaving, Blade fixed Arthur with an intense stare. You never speak of it directly, the half-wolf said, but I sense your world was not so dissimilar from ours rulers exploiting the ruled cycles of violence perpetuating themselves. Hope remaining just out of reach. Arthur adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with the perception. Maybe so. And in your world, did you succeed in breaking these cycles? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications. Arthur thought of his final ride to the mountain, of Dutch's descent into madness, of the Pinkertons, and the inexorable march of civilization crushing everything in its path. No, he admitted finally, but I gave someone else a chance to try. Blade nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Then perhaps that is why you are here, Arthur Morgan. Not to succeed where you once failed, but to ensure others have their chance. As Arthur and Blade journeyed toward the hidden entrance to Nokron, leaving Alexander to his promised distraction, the burning Erdtree loomed ever-present in the sky, a constant reminder of the irrevocable step they had taken. There would be no returning to the world as it was. For better or worse, change had been set in motion. In the shadow of Laendal's outer walls, they encountered Millicent, the young woman's prosthetic arm gleaming dully in the ashen light. Her condition had worsened, the golden scarlet rot spreading visibly up her neck despite Gowry's treatments. I wondered if I would find you, she said to Arthur, her voice strained but resolute. The burning tree, your doing. Mine and Melina's, Arthur confirmed. Millicent smiled faintly. Good. The rot festered in its roots for too long. Sometimes fire is the only cleansing. Her words reminded Arthur of the tuberculosis that had ravaged his body in his first life, an inexorable decay that no medicine could halt. He felt a kinship with Millicent that transcended the strangeness of this world. You should rest, he told her. This fight ain't yours. Millicent straightened, indignation flashing in her eyes. Every fight in the lands between is mine, outsider. The rot in my body connects me to all that suffers here. She extended her good hand to Arthur. I have something for you, taken from my father Gowry's chambers. In her palm lay a talisman depicting a scarlet flower in bloom. The kindred of rot's exaltation, it strengthens one who stands near sources of decay. Since you insist on wading into the heart of corruption, you might as well benefit from its proximity. Arthur accepted the gift with solemn gratitude, tucking it into his satchel alongside the other talismans he'd collected the Erdtree's favor given by fear. The green turtle shell from the depths of the Weeping Peninsula and the assassin's crimson dagger claimed from a knight's cavalry. Melina, Millicent said suddenly, you said she helped you burn the Erdtree. Where is she now? Arthur's expression darkened. She sacrificed herself to kindle the flame. Millicent closed her eyes, absorbing this information. Then she found her purpose, as she always sought to do. We should all be so fortunate. With those words, Millicent continued on her own path, promising to meet Arthur once more, when the world is made anew or burns completely to ash. As Arthur and Blade descended into the depths that would lead them to Nokron, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on Arthur's shoulders. He had arrived in this world, a stranger, yet now found himself central to its potential rebirth. The parallels to his first life were impossible to ignore, once again fighting against corrupt powers, once again forming bonds with the downtrodden and the idealistic, yet this time felt different. In the lands between, the corruption was literal as well as figurative, visible in the scarlet rot, the death root, and the madness inflicted by the greater will's abandonment. And unlike his time with Dutch, Arthur now chose his own path, guided by his own moral compass rather than another's charismatic vision. Rani believes the Age of Stars will free people from destiny, Blade explained as they navigated the caverns beneath Limgrave. No more golden order dictating who lives in grace and who lives in shadow. Sounds fine in theory, Arthur replied, ducking beneath a low stalactite. But I've learned to be suspicious of anyone promising paradise. Blade's laughter echoed through the tunnel, a healthy skepticism. Rani would appreciate it, I think. She has no interest in worship, only in freedom. The passage opened into an impossibly vast underground expanse where the ruins of Nokron stretched before them, illuminated by a false sky embedded with artificial stars. Buildings of impossible architecture rose from the mist, their design suggesting knowledge far beyond anything Arthur had encountered. What happened here? Arthur whispered, awestruck despite himself. They defied the greater will, Blade answered simply. Created the Fingerslayer blade, a weapon capable of killing the two fingers themselves. For this heresy, they were cast beneath the earth, their sky stolen, their civilization reduced to ruins. Arthur took in the haunting beauty of the fallen city. And now Rani wants to finish what they started. Yes, with our help. Blade's ears pricked forward, and it seems we are expected." From the shadows emerged Rani's other servants, Seluvis the sorcerer, whose arrogance Arthur had never warmed to, and Egi the troll blacksmith, whose gentle wisdom had provided guidance on many occasions. The outsider arrives with perfect timing, Seluvis remarked, his mask hiding all but the contempt in his voice. "How convenient that you should burn the Erdtree just as Our Lady requires access to its deepest roots." "Enough, Seluvis," Egi rumbled. "Arthur Morgan has proven himself a true ally. The burning of the Erdtree was foretold in the stars, Rani reads." Arthur's hand instinctively moved to his revolver. Something in Seluvis's manner had always set his instincts on edge, a familiar type of danger he'd encountered in men like Micah Bell. "Where's Rani?" Arthur asked, addressing Egi directly. The giant blacksmith gestured toward the heart of the ruined city, at the cathedral, preparing the chamber. The fingerslayer blade must be used at precisely the right moment, when the stars align above and below. As they journeyed deeper into Nokron, Arthur found himself reflecting on the strangeness of his situation. In his first life, he had been a simple outlaw, violent work done for practical reasons. Money, survival, loyalty to the gang. Now he walked among sorcerers and demigods, participating in rituals that might reshape reality itself. "You're quiet," Blade observed as they crossed a bridge, spanning a chasm of impossible depth. "Just thinking," Arthur replied, "about how far I've come from robbing stagecoaches and running from the law. Do you miss it, your former life?" Arthur considered the question seriously. "Parts of it. The simplicity, maybe, knowing who your enemies were, understanding the stakes." He gestured to the ethereal landscape around them. "All this gods and magic and cosmic trees, it's a bit beyond my reckoning." "Yet you adapt," Egi noted from behind them. "You learn and grow. Few from any world could have accomplished what you have in these lands." The cathedral at Nokron's center rose before them, a structure of such impossible geometry that Arthur's eyes struggled to follow its contours. Within its central chamber stood Rani in her true form, not the doll body she typically inhabited, but a spectral figure of haunting blue radiance. "Arthur Morgan." She greeted him, her voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. "The outsider who burns worlds. You have come at last." The wind howled across the mountaintops as Arthur gazed upon the fire giant's smouldering remains. The creature had been a fierce opponent, but in death it revealed what the tarnished sought a way to reach the forge of the giants. Arthur's new-found companions gathered around him, Melina with her knowing eyes, Alexander the warrior jar clanking proudly, and Blade the half-wolf standing tall against the biting cold. "You ain't seen nothing like this in your world, have you, outlaw?" Blade rumbled. "Can't say that I have," Arthur replied, holstering his revolver. "Giants, where I'm from, are just tall tales to scare children." Melina approached a massive forge that glowed with ancient fire. "This is where destinies change, Arthur Morgan. The Erdtree awaits, but reaching it requires sacrifice. Arthur removed his hat, snow gathering on its brim. Seems like sacrifice is the one thing that don't change no matter what world you're in. When Melina offered herself to the flame, Arthur instinctively moved to stop her, but Blade held him back. Some choices must be respected, even when they pain us. As Melina's form dissolved into the roaring flame, the skies darkened, and the massive Erdtree in the distance began to burn. The path was open, but at terrible cost. I reckon this is what Dutch would have called one last big score, Arthur muttered. Except this time, it ain't about money. Alexander clanked forward. The capital awaits, my friend. Leyndell and all its horrors. The journey to Leyndell revealed a city under siege, not just from Tarnished seeking the throne, but from chaos itself. The burning of the Erdtree had unleashed ancient powers. As Arthur and his companions approached the royal thoroughfare, they found knights of gleaming gold locked in combat with abominations of flesh and scale. Tree sentinels, Blade whispered. The Elden Lord's most faithful defenders. They don't look too happy to see us, Arthur replied, drawing his enchanted revolvers, now glowing with the blessing of the Round Table hold. The battle through the capital streets was relentless. Arthur's gunslinging skills had evolved since his arrival. Each shot carried runic energy that could pierce even the golden armor of Leyndell's defenders. Yet, for every knight they felled, more horrors emerged from the shadows. When they reached the massive door to the royal chambers, Alexander stepped forward with uncharacteristic solemnity. I cannot follow further, my friend. My purpose calls me elsewhere. Arthur clasped the Jar Warrior's ceramic arm. You've been a better companion than most men I've known. Perhaps in another life we could have shared a drink at your saloon, Alexander replied. It's called a saloon, partner, and I would have liked that. Beyond the door awaited Godfrey, first Elden Lord, a towering figure of muscle and sinew who had cast aside his golden glory to become a simple warrior once more. Arthur had faced imposing men before, from Cornwall's hired guns to Micah's treachery, but never a being of such raw, primal strength. You stand before me, mortal from beyond the fog, Godfrey boomed, hefting his massive axe. What makes you think you deserve the throne? Arthur spat to the side. I ain't here for no throne. I'm here because folks are suffering, and from what I've seen, you lords ain't done much about it. Godfrey laughed, a sound like thunder rolling across mountains. Then show me your conviction, gunslinger. The battle shook the very foundations of the chamber. Arthur's bullets, even imbued with magic, barely slowed the first Elden Lord. When Godfrey's axe shattered a pillar inches from Arthur's head, he knew conventional tactics would fail. Drawing upon the lessons learned from Ranni the Witch and the Turtle Pope Miriel, Arthur channeled the power of his talisman, the one Dutch had given him long ago, now transformed by the lands between. The locket glowed with golden light as Arthur remembered those he'd helped along his journey. This ain't just my fight. Arthur growled, dodging another swing. It's for all the folks caught in the crossfire of your grand designs. When Godfrey finally fell to his knees, blood streaming from countless wounds, he looked up at Arthur with newfound respect. Perhaps a different kind of lord is what these lands need. Beyond Godfrey's chamber lay the final obstacle, Radagon of the Golden Order and the Elden Beast itself. As Arthur approached, he felt Blade tense beside him. This is where it ends, Arthur, the very heart of it all. Radagon stood silent, a fractured being of pure light and divine purpose. When he moved, reality itself seemed to bend. Arthur's first shots passed harmlessly through the god's form. Damn it all! Arthur hissed, rolling away from a hammer strike that left a crater in the marble floor. How do you kill something that ain't really alive? Blade bared his fangs. Not with bullets, outlaw, with faith. The battle stretched beyond physical endurance. For every wound they inflicted upon Radagon, the god responded with devastating spells that left Arthur gasping and burned. When Blade fell, his armor cracked and smoking, Arthur found himself alone against divinity itself. In that moment, Arthur recalled the words of Sister Calderon from a lifetime ago. There is goodness in you, Mr. Morgan, and that is worth believing in. Arthur holstered his guns and reached deep within himself, not for rage or power, but for the compassion that had defined his final days in his own world. The Elden Ring, fractured and corrupted, responded to this most unexpected approach. "I seen enough dying and suffering," Arthur declared, blood trickling down his face as he approached the stunned Radagon. "In my world and in yours, it's time for something different." When his hand touched Radagon's glowing form, a blinding light engulfed the chamber. Arthur felt himself dissolving, becoming part of something vast and incomprehensible. The Elden Beast emerged, a creature of stars and cosmic majesty that sought to absorb him completely. In the space between worlds, Arthur found himself confronting not just the beast, but the fundamental nature of the lands between. Visions flashed before him. Dutch's betrayal, Hosea's wisdom, John's future, and the sunset he had faced alone on that mountain. "I know what it means to die for something that matters," Arthur whispered to the cosmic entity. "Do you?" The Elden Beast recoiled, its starlight form rippling with uncertainty. In that hesitation, Arthur found his opportunity, not to destroy, but to mend. Reaching into the very fabric of the Elden Ring itself, Arthur did something Tarnished had attempted. He offered not conquest, but restoration. The fragments of the ring, responding to his intent, began to realign themselves, not into the order demanded by the greater will, but into something new and uniquely balanced. As the ring reformed, Arthur felt himself changing. The tuberculosis that had followed him even into this world, finally burning away in the cosmic fire. The throne room rematerialized around him, but transformed. The Erdtree's flames had subsided, replaced by a gentle golden glow that spread across the land like sunrise after a long night. Blade stirred, his wounds healing as the renewed energy washed over him. What? What have you done, Morgan? Arthur stood at the center of the chamber, the reformed Elden Ring hovering before him. What needed doing? This world was broken because everybody wanted to rule it. Maybe it needed someone who just wanted to fix it. When Arthur emerged from the Erdtree, the lands between had already begun to change. The scarlet rot receded from Caelid, the eternal snow of the mountaintops began to thaw, and across the realm the mindless undead regained their senses. At the round table hold, the survivors gathered to hear what had transpired. Roderica and Hugh embraced like father and daughter. Nepheli Lu stood proudly as regent of Limgrave. Even Thea smiled. The death blight that had consumed her now transformed into a gentle power that guided souls to proper rest. The age of fracture is ended, declared Sir Gideon Offner, his tone mixing awe with scholarly interest. But what shall we call this new era? Arthur, still uncomfortable with ceremony, merely shrugged. Call it whatever you want. What matters is what you build with it. In the months that followed, Arthur travelled the rejuvenated lands. He helped establish trade routes between regions long isolated, taught marksmanship to the hunters of Raya Lucaria, and even reconciled warring factions with his peculiar blend of bluntness and unexpected wisdom. When he reached the Church of Ele, where his journey had begun, he found Kale the merchant still there, still trading, still watching. I knew you were different, the merchant said with a knowing smile, not just another tarnished seeking glory. Arthur settled beside the fire, finally allowing himself to rest. Never was much for glory, just tried to do right in the end. And what now, Elden Lord, who refuses the title? The lands between are healing, but they will always need guidance. Arthur gazed up at the stars, so different from those he'd known in his first life. I'm thinking maybe it's time I found my way home. There are folks there I left behind. A boy who needed a father. Friends who deserved better. Kale nodded thoughtfully. The barriers between worlds have thinned since you restored the ring. Such a journey might be possible, though not without cost. There's always a cost, Arthur replied. Question is whether it's worth paying. The decision came on a quiet evening at the mountaintop of the giants, where Arthur had returned to visit Melina's memorial. Though she had sacrificed herself to burn the Erdtree, traces of her spirit remained, visible now only to Arthur's enhanced perception. You could stay, her ethereal voice suggested. This world loves you as its savior. Arthur shook his head. That's the problem. I ain't no savior, just a man who's seen enough to know better. Then I can show you the way back, she offered. But the passage will require the power you hold as keeper of the ring. You must choose, remain immortal here, or return to your world as you left it. Arthur understood immediately. Return to his tuberculosis, to his approaching death. return to that mountainside where he had sacrificed himself for John Marston's future. Seems like an easy choice when you put it that way, Arthur said, watching the sunset paint the snowfields gold. I already made my peace with dying once. On the eve of his departure, Arthur's companions gathered at the Erdtree. Alexander had returned from his warrior's journey. Blade stood tall despite the sorrow in his eyes, and even Rani the witch appeared, her 4 arms folding in a gesture of respect. The lands between will remember Arthur Morgan, Blade declared, not as Elden Lord, but as something greater, a true friend to a broken world. Alexander clanked in agreement. Songs will be sung of the gunslinger who chose compassion over conquest. Arthur, embarrassed as always by praise, simply adjusted his hat. Just make sure they get the story straight. I wasn't no hero, just someone who learned from his mistakes. Rani approached, her ghostly form hovering before him. You understand, once you release the power of the ring to open the way, all that you accomplished here remains, but you return to your fate. I understand, Arthur nodded, and I'm ready. As the ritual began, Arthur felt the power of the Elden Ring flowing through him one final time. The great runes aligned, creating a doorway of pure light. Through it, he could see the familiar landscape of the American frontier, the mountain where his journey had ended. Before stepping through, Arthur turned back one last time, taking in the faces of those who had become as dear to him as any gang member. Thank you, he said simply, for showing me there's always another chance to do right. Then Arthur Morgan walked into the light, the power of the Elden Ring flowing from him to seal the passage behind him. He awoke on that same mountainside, the sun setting just as he remembered. His body was weak, the tuberculosis still gripping his lungs. Yet something had changed, an inner peace, a certainty that his sacrifice had meaning across worlds. As Arthur Morgan watched his final sunset, he thought not of Dutch's betrayal or Micah's treachery, but of the lands between and the friends he had made there. He thought of worlds mended and second chances given. He thought of what it meant to be a true lord, not one who rules, but one who serves. I guess we're just about done, my friend, he whispered to no one and everyone as darkness gently claimed him. In the lands between, they tell stories of the strange tarnished who refused a throne, who mended the Elden Ring not for power but for peace. Some claim he was a spirit sent by the greater will itself, others that he was a wanderer from beyond the fog of time. Only those closest to him know the truth, that Arthur Morgan was simply a man who, having failed once to find redemption, was given the rarest of gifts, a second chance to get it right. And in both worlds, that was enough.